This is what he's talking about. And this is the same point that Brother Shaul is making here. The chosen ones, those who accepted the Messiah, they accepted the word. But then you have the rest who were hardened. Okay? Now some people think, hold up, but isn't that unfair? How is it that the Creator hardened people that they not accept? Well, he's going to explain all of that as we get through this particular excerpt from this letter. He's going to break all of that down for us. So let's continue. He says, verse 8, according as it is written. Now let me go back up to 7. Let's get down and so you can hear the thought completely. He says, what then? That which Israel seeks for, that he didn't obtain, but the chosen ones obtained it, and the rest were hardened. According as it is written. When he says according as it is written, what I'm going to do now for you, I'm going to give you biblical proof. This is why it happened that way. So he says, Elohim gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that they should not see, and ears that they should not hear, to this very day. David says, let their table be made a snare and a trap, a stumbling block, and a retribution to them. Let their eyes be darkened that they may not see, always keep their backs bent. So this happened to Israel, the hardening, that is, because of prophecy. The word was spoken by way of Yahweh's servant, the prophet, and it's being carried out. And Brother Shaul is only bringing it to light. That's all he's doing. But there's a reason why, and we're going to see as we go down. There's a reason why they were hardened. And we'll see. In verse 11, he says, I asked them, did they stumble that they might fall? May it never be. Listen to what he says. But by their fall, salvation has come to the Gentiles to provoke them to jealousy. Hold up now. So you have some brothers and sisters out here who believe that the Gentiles coming into this way of life, they're actually not Gentiles, they're Israelites who lost their way and forgot who they were. If that's the case, explain this. Let's go to Devarim, chapter 32. Let's pick up in verse 19. Now this is Brother Moshe. Okay? This is from the Torah. Okay? Listen to what he says. Deuteronomy 32:19. It says, Yahweh saw and abhorred because of the provocation of his sons and his daughters. He said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end will be, for they are a very perverse generation, sons in whom is no faithfulness. They have moved me to jealousy with that which is not Elohim. They have provoked me to anger with their vanities. I will move them to jealousy with those who are not a people. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. He's not talking about Israelites who lost their identity. He's talking about the nations of the world. Now, I'm not going to get too far into this, but think about this. When a situation happened with Noah, right? One of the things that he said, you find this in Genesis chapter 9. He says that Japheth will dwell in the tents of Shem. Japheth will dwell in the tents of Shem. When you get a chance, I'm not just going to tell you to look that verse up, but you can look it up as well. But as always, seek Abba's guidance with sincerity, with humility, in prayer. Okay? It was basically foretelling how Japheth's line is going to dwell in the tents of Shem, so it's not unusual that you have the Caucasians who are presenting themselves as if they are Israel. It's according to the word. This is the nation that the Most High said he was going to rise up to provoke his people to jealousy. Okay? It's according to his word. But let's continue. Let's pick up in Romans chapter 11 and verse 12. All right? And I want people to understand, he is not talking about Israelites who have assimilated to other peoples and now they're coming back to recognize who they are. No, those Israelites are going to be covered as well. But he's actually talking about real 100% people from other nations. Gentiles, heathens, whatever you prefer. All right? Romans 11:12. He says, now, and he's talking about the fall of Israel. Listen to what he says. If there fall, and he's talking, remember, he's talking about Israel falling. He's talking about the ones who have been hardened or the ones who have been blinded. Now, if their fall is the riches of the world, and their loss the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? For I speak to you who are Gentiles. Since then, as I am an apostle to Gentiles, I glorify my ministry. If by any means I may provoke to jealousy those who are my flesh, and may save some of them. Do you hear that? He's going right back to what Brother Moshe said about Israel being provoked to jealousy by people that's not Yahweh's people, by a foolish nation. Okay? Verse 15. And listen to this. He's talking about Israel. For if the rejection of them is the reconciling of the world, what would their acceptance be but life from the dead? So he's talking about a period of time where Israel, hardened Israel, blinded Israel, is going to be rejected, while people from another nation is going to be coming in. Okay, this is what he's saying. He said, for if the rejection of them is the reconciling of the world, for if the rejection of them is the reconciling of the world, the rest of the world, remember? There are others that are going to gather in addition to Israel. This is what it's referring to. Verse 16. If the first fruit is holy, so is the lump. If the root is holy, so are the branches. Pay attention to this part. But if some of the branches were broken off, these are the Israelites who are caught up into the ways of the world. Okay? I'm not focused so much on, well, they don't know who they are. They lost their identity. No, here's what people have to understand. Yahweh knows who they are. That's what's important. Yahweh knows exactly who they are. He knows who his people are. So they're not lost in that context. Listen to this. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive, were grafted in among them. We got to get the mind. There's an image now. Because what he's doing, he's using an analogy of these two olive trees. You have the good olive tree, you have the wild olive tree. The good olive tree pointed to Israel. The wild olive tree points to the world. Okay? Branches were broken off the good olive tree. And branches were broken off the wild olive tree and grafted into the good olive tree. This is what he's talking about. If you come from Israel, I don't care if you're caught up in the world or not, you are still by blood an Israelite. Whereas the Gentiles, they are Gentiles. They are not of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov's line. There's a distinction. There's a difference. Well, let's continue. He says, verse 17 again. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive, were grafted in among them, and became partaker with them of the root and of the richness of the olive tree, don't boast over the branches. In other words, Gentiles coming in, you don't have room to boast over those who were broken off for your sakes. This is what he's talking about. Listen to what he said. Don't boast over the branches. But if you boast, it is not you who support the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. True. Listen, and this is where we get the understanding as it pertains to why Israel was hardened and why Israel was blinded. Listen to this. Romans 11:20. He says, true. By their unbelief they were broken off. And that's what we got to understand. Israel's problem has always been lack of faith. They did not believe in Yahweh. They did not believe in his servants, the prophets. They killed them. That's always been our forefathers' problem. Faith. And we're going to see examples of that as we move forward. Okay? As we move forward. He says, once again, verse 20, by their unbelief they were broken off, and you stand by your faith. He says, don't be conceited, but fear. For if Elohim didn't spare the natural branches, neither will he spare you. And what he means by that is this. Just as they fell as a result of unbelief, if you should lack faith or choose not to believe, you will also be in that same state. He says, verse 22, see then the goodness and the severity of Elohim. So now, you're talking about his grace, his mercy, and then you have his judgment. It says, toward those who fell, severity. That was judgment for those who were broken off. It was judgment. But towards you, goodness. If you continue in his goodness, otherwise you also will be cut off. He says, verse 23, they also, and here's the part right here, pay close attention to what he's about to say, because now he's referencing those branches that were broken off. Okay? He says, they also, if they don't continue in their unbelief. In other words, what Israel has to do is to have faith. Begin believing in Yahweh again. Begin following his servants, the prophets. Being taught by his priesthood. This is what he's talking about. Again, verse 23. They also, if they don't continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in. For Elohim is able to graft them in again. Now listen to this part right here. For if you were cut out of that which is by nature a wild olive tree, and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree. Let me explain what this is first, before I finish that passage. What Abba helped me to see, what he taught me, and I came across some information, and for those who are listening, you can go back and you can research this on your own. Because there is actually a technique that can be used when you graft in one tree to another tree. Now what I found out was this. Let's say you got two trees. Let's say, let me share this part first. What I found out was this. Let's say apples. Like one of my favorite apples is Honeycrisp apples. Now you would think that since it's a Honeycrisp apple, and if I was to take one of these seeds from the Honeycrisp apple and I plant this seed, that automatically it's going to grow a Honeycrisp apple tree. Well, what I found out is that it doesn't work that way. It'll grow, whatever tree grows up, it will produce apples, but it's not guaranteed what type of apples, because there's several types, you know. You got, there's several types for those who are familiar with apples, okay. Now, what I learned is this. If you want Honeycrisp apples, what you're supposed to do, you're supposed to take one of the branches from the Honeycrisp apple tree, and when you graft it into another tree, right, that Honeycrisp apple tree branch will continue to produce Honeycrisp apples. Even if it's, and I'm just going to go to an opposite, even if it's grafted into a pear tree, it will continue to produce Honeycrisp apples. Okay? And vice versa. If you took a pear, let's say it was a Bosc pear, right? And that's what you want to grow. You take a branch from that and you graft it into a Honeycrisp apple tree. Well, guess what? It's still going to produce Bosc pears. That is according to nature. And I wanted to make that point. That is according to nature. Whatever that branch was producing when you graft it into the other tree, it's going to keep producing that. Here's what we got to understand about Brother Shaul's explanation. Going back to Romans 11:24. He said, for if you were cut out of that which is by nature a wild olive tree. Now, you got the wild olive tree, you got the good olive tree. So I'm taking the branches off the wild olive tree. He said, and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree. What he means by that is this. You're not going to produce wild olives anymore. You are now going to start producing whatever the root and the fatness of this good olive tree is producing. What is that teaching us about the Gentiles? Think about that. What does that teach us about Gentiles who are grafted into Israel? They are no longer Gentiles. They are now Israelites. Keep that in mind. He says, again, for if you were cut out of that which is by nature a wild olive tree, and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more will these, which are the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? So listen to the point that he's making. If you able to be grafted into a good olive tree, and now you're producing, the same thing that the good olive tree produces, what about the branches that was actually broken off from this olive tree that was supposed to be producing that? So when we graft these branches back in, guess what? They're going to keep producing the exact same thing. This is the point that he's making. So no, Israel has not been replaced by Christianity. That's a lie. The Creator is establishing Israel. You see? Because Israel is a family. Israel is a nation, and Israel is the church. Let's continue. Verse 25. For I don't desire you to be ignorant, brothers, of this mystery, so that you won't be wise in your own conceit, that a partial hardening has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Israelites has come in. No, that's not what he's talking about. Until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel will be saved. We are going to touch on that in another lesson. What he actually means by that. Because you have some people who have this idea that every biological descendant of Israel is going to be saved. That's not what he's talking about. Remember, we just read it. If they turn from their unbelief, there's something they have to do. They have to believe. Okay? Verse 26 again. And so all Israel will be saved. Even as it is written, there will come out of Zion the deliverer, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. This is my covenant with them, when I will take away their sins. Concerning the good news, they are enemies for your sake. But concerning the election, they are beloved for the Father's sake. For the gifts and the calling of Elohim are irrevocable. For as you in time past were disobedient to Elohim, but now have obtained mercy by their disobedience. You hear that? He's talking to the Gentiles. Keep in mind, he's writing this letter to the Romans, and he's explaining to the Romans why they're able to be allowed to become Israelites. This is what he's explaining. They were disobedient. So now he built on it. Not only did they not believe in the Most High, they were disobedient. So now through their disobedience, you know what they did? They proved that they did not believe. Because obedience and faith and obedience goes hand in hand. Remember that. Remember that. Faith and obedience and faith go hand in hand. It's not one over the other, or one in spite of or instead of the other. It's 1 + 1. You got to have both. And we're going to see the word prove that later on. Okay. Again, he says, verse 29, for the gifts and the calling of Elohim are irrevocable. For as you in time past were disobedient to Elohim, but now have obtained mercy by their disobedience, even so these also have now been disobedient, that by the mercy shown to you, they may also obtain mercy. Listen to that. For Elohim has shut up all to disobedience, that he might have mercy on all. That's just like saying Elohim has declared all have sinned and fallen short of the glory. This is what it's talking about. Verse 33. Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and the knowledge of Elohim. How unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. For who has known the mind of Adonai, or who has been his counselor, or who has first given to him, and it will be repaid to him again? For of him, and through him, and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. Hallelujah. Okay. Now let's take your mind back and close. And we got 3 other actually 4 passages we want to look at. Okay, I'm almost done. And again, the next 3 passages is basically to show that it was always Yahweh's intention to offer salvation to the Gentiles. And we're going to see what he said to Abraham first. In Genesis chapter 12 and verse 3, he says, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who treats you with contempt. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you. He told that to Abraham, right? Listen to what he said to Yitzchak. Genesis 26:4. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the sky, and will give all these lands to your offspring. In your offspring will all the nations of the earth be blessed. So he told it to Abraham and to Isaac. And he told it to Yaakov too. Let's go to Genesis 28:14. Your offspring will be as the dust of the earth, and you will spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. In you and in your offspring will all the families of the earth be blessed. And as the Torah teaches, out of the mouth of 2 or 3 shall a matter be established. He said it 3 times to the 3 patriarchs. Why? He's establishing it. That's why. Because it's his word. So let's put a nice little bow on this. Let's go to Galatians chapter 3, starting at verse 1. And this is our last passage, okay? Foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you not to obey the truth, before whose eyes Yahushua HaMashiach was openly portrayed among you as crucified? I just want to learn this from you. Did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law, or by the hearing of faith? Are you so foolish, having begun in the Spirit? Are you now completed in the flesh? Did you suffer so many things in vain, if it is indeed in vain? He therefore who supplies the Spirit to you and does miracles among you, does he do it by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? Let me just add this, because some people hear that works of the law and they're automatically going to obeying the Torah. That's not what he's talking about. When he says the works of the law, he means just that. He's talking about the sacrificial system. And we went through the sacrificial system. And when you look at the sacrificial system, there was a lot of work involved when it came to sacrificing those animals. This is what he's talking about. Okay? That can be substantiated in another place in Galatians. Matter of fact, it may be later on in this chapter, but we're not touching on that. I just wanted to mention that for those who may be listening. I don't want you to get it misconstrued that he's talking about obeying Torah. No, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about a specific law. So let me just add this, and then I'll finish this out. Whenever it comes to the term law used in the New Testament, we were taught years ago by our beloved rabbi. We have to ask the question, what law? Because what people have done, they have just brought in the term to everything that